1873, outside Abilene, Kansas. The laughter started before she even had both boots on the stirrups. Olive Fairburn didn't flinch. She squared her shoulders, threw one leg over the saddle, and looked the ranch hands dead in the eye as they chuckled around the corral. Dust swirled up around her skirts, her hands gripping the worn leather of the saddle horn like she meant business because she did. "She wants to ride?" One man hooted, nudging the others. "That's a mean-tempered gelding, not some Sunday pony." "She'll last 2 seconds," another muttered. "I'll show you how," came a voice from behind them low. Sure, not loud, but it cut through the noise like a blade through cloth. The laughter died just like that. Olive turned toward the voice and found a man leaning against the fence rail. He was tall, broad across the chest, with sun-browned skin and a lean stillness to him that reminded her of a stalking cat. His hat shadowed his eyes, but when he lifted his gaze to her, there was no mockery in them, just calm, quiet attention. "Name's Jasper McAllister," he said, stepping forward. "That horse is a handful, but I'll show you how." Olive met his eyes, not blinking. "All right then." She climbed down, dusted off her gloves, and followed him to the other side of the corral, ignoring the muttered bets and snickers behind her. Jasper nodded toward the chestnut gelding. "He's mean because folks treat him like he ought to be. You want him to trust you, you treat him different." "I know about trust," Olive said. "I just don't know horses." His brow lifted. "You learn fast." "I learn what I need to." He gave a slow nod and handed her a sugar cube. "Start with this." By the time the sun dropped low and orange over the Kansas plains, Olive was up in the saddle again, this time with Jasper beside her, talking her through every movement, every shift of weight. Her dress was dusty, her hands a little raw, but her eyes were bright as firelight, and the horse was calmer, not gentle but listening. She rode half a circle, then stopped, breathless and grinning. Jasper watched her with quiet pride, arms folded. "You ain't bad," he said. "You ain't as scary as you look," she said back. He chuckled, but it was soft, and it faded into a thoughtful silence. That night, she stayed in the guest bunkhouse near the barn. She had no home to go back to. Her father had died the previous winter, and the little farm they had scraped together had been lost to debt. She had come to Abilene because her cousin worked the saloon, and word was they needed women to help serve. But Olive had never been good at simpering or pouring drinks for men who stared too long. She had grit that did not soften under pressure. She wanted to work with her hands. She wanted to ride. The next morning, Jasper was waiting by the corral again. "You showing up for another laugh?" he asked. "I came to learn," she said, and he smiled. "Then let's get to it." Each morning became a lesson. Jasper taught her how to saddle, how to ride bareback across open pasture, how to feel the horse's movement like a second heartbeat. Olive listened, asked questions, fell once hard but got up laughing through the dirt in her teeth. And Jasper, who rarely spoke more than a few words at a time, started talking more. He told her about growing up in Arkansas, about his mother's cornbread, about the wild pony he tried to catch when he was 12. He talked about the war briefly, with tight shoulders, and about the ranch he now helped run with a quiet sense of purpose. Olive told him how her mother died young, how she and her father lived off little but kept their heads high. She told him she wanted more than just to survive. She wanted to make something of herself. Not in a grand way, but in an honest one. One morning, he handed her the reins and said, "Take him out." She blinked. "Alone? You are ready." She rode through the golden grass, wind in her face, heart full, and when she came back an hour later, Jasper was waiting with a grin that made her stomach flip. "You did good," he said. "You taught me," she said, "right when they all thought I was a fool." He looked at her, then really looked and said, "I never thought you were a fool. It hit her like something warm and solid in the chest. Later that week, a storm rolled through. Hard rain, snapping wind. A ranch hand's little boy, Victor, had wandered out after one of the goats and gotten lost. Panic spread fast. Jasper rode out with a group of men. Olive was told to wait, but she did not. She knew those hills now. She knew that boy he had sat beside her at supper, told her he liked the way she whistled. She saddled up and rode straight into that rain, calling his name. She found him huddled beneath a scrub tree, soaked to the bone, shivering. "Victor!" she cried, pulling him into her arms. He clung to her, teeth chattering, and she wrapped her coat around him, steering the horse back toward the ranch as thunder cracked overhead. When they returned, Jasper rode in behind her, jaw tight with worry that melted into relief the moment he saw her. "You found him," he said, dismounting fast. "He is cold but safe," she said, blinking rain from her lashes. Jasper looked between her and the boy, then stepped forward and touched her cheek. "You should not have gone alone. I could not let him die out there." His hand stayed on her face a moment longer. "You are braver than most men I know." They stood there, soaked, the storm easing behind them, and something shifted in the air between them, something quiet but deep. The next morning, she found a bouquet of prairie wildflowers on the fence post. No note, but she knew, and when she turned, Jasper was watching from the barn door, his hands in his pockets, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You putting flowers on the fence now?" she asked, walking over. "Maybe. For me." He looked at her then, no shadows in his gaze. "Yes," she swallowed. "Why?" "Because I think about you," he said. "More than I probably should." She stepped closer. "I think about you too." He did not rush forward. He just reached out, tucked a strand of damp hair behind her ear. "Then maybe we ought to stop thinking and do something about it." Her heart beat hard against her ribs. "Like what?" "Like riding out together tomorrow. Just you and me." She smiled. "I would like that." He smiled back. "Good." And for the first time since she had come west, Olive Fairburn felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The morning light came sharp and clear, the sky rinsed clean after the storm. Wind stirred the tall grass, and the earth gave off that deep, damp scent of rain-sunk loam. Olive stepped out of the bunkhouse with her boots freshly brushed and her braid tied tight, the prairie stretching wide in every direction like an open promise. Jasper waited by the gate, saddling 2 horses. Not the gelding she'd ridden before, these were trail mounts, steadier. One was deep bay, the other gray flecked with a white blaze down its nose. "You ever ride past the Cottonwood Bluff?" he asked. She shook her head. "Never been that far." He nodded once. "We'll take the long way. Show you the land like it was before fences." They rode out single file at first, the grass shoulder high in places, cicadas droning in the warmth. Once they passed the last wind-worn fence post, Jasper pulled his mount alongside hers. "Used to be Cheyenne hunting ground out this way," he said. "My uncle told me about ghost herds used to run the low hills. Buffalo so thick you couldn't see the earth beneath them." "You believe him?" she asked. "Don't see why he'd lie." They rode on in silence for a time, the only sound the creak of leather and the breeze nudging through the grass like a whispered hymn. The land rolled gentle and wide, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional blackened stump from some old fire. "You always planned to stay out here?" she asked after a while. "No," he said. "Didn't think I'd stay anywhere." She glanced at him. "And now?" He looked ahead. "Now I think it matters more where a person chooses to root than where they run." They crossed a narrow creek, the horses stepping careful through the stones. On the far side, a hawk lifted from a cottonwood, its wings sharp against the sky. Jasper pointed to a ridge up ahead. There's a place I go sometimes. You'll see why. They climbed slow, the horses working steady. At the top, the land opened wide and endless. Below them, golden fields stretched to a violet horizon. A few distant cattle moved like specks. The sky above held nothing but light and the slow drift of clouds. Olive sat quiet, letting it settle into her bones. "Beautiful," she said, voice low. "Place like this," Jasper said. "You start to hear yourself think." They dismounted and let the horses graze. Jasper peeled off his gloves and sat on a flat stone, elbows on his knees. "There's something I want to ask you." Olive turned to face him, heart ticking a little faster. "All right. You said you came here for work. You still looking to leave?" She shook her head. "No, not anymore." He studied her face with the same quiet steadiness he used when reading sky signs before a storm. "Then maybe you'd think about staying on. Not just for the riding." She stepped closer. "Say what you mean, Jasper." He met her eyes. "I want to build something, not a ranch. A life, with someone who doesn't scare easy. Someone who rides through storms and brings lost boys home." Her throat tightened. "You think I'd be good at that?" "I know it." A long wind moved through the grass below. She lowered herself beside him, their knees brushing. "All right," she said. "But I won't be quiet, and I won't always follow. I wouldn't want you to." They sat like that, shoulder to shoulder, as the sun climbed higher. No promises spoken, none needed. It was there in the way his hand found hers without hesitation, in the way her fingers curled around his like they already knew the shape of him. When they mounted again, it was side by side. Not teacher and student, not cowboy and newcomer, just two people riding the same path under the same wide sky. By late August, the prairie heat had settled into everything: fence posts, bones, breath. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer and the horses sweat even beneath shade. Jasper's shirt sleeves were rolled past his elbows now, and Olive had taken to tying a damp kerchief around her neck each morning before they rode out to tend fence lines or check the cattle that grazed up near the south ridge. They worked without speaking much during the day. There wasn't need for it. She'd learned his way of reading the land, and he'd come to trust the rhythm of her hands. When a calf turned up caught in a dry gulch, it was Olive who spotted the drag marks in the dust, who slid down the slope without hesitation and tied the rope firm around its chest while Jasper steadied the mount above. That evening, she helped the ranch cook shell beans behind the kitchen tent. Jasper lingered nearby, cleaning his saddle gear by lantern light. The others had grown used to seeing them together, and no one said much anymore except old Mr. Caldwell, who gave Olive a nod one night and murmured, "He don't talk about Arkansas to just anyone." Later, while the men played cards and the cicadas rasped into the dark, Jasper asked, "You ever learn to shoot?" Olive glanced up from the strip of fabric she was hemming. "I've handled a rifle. My father taught me the basics, but I never cared for it." He tugged on the brim of his hat. "A wolf took one of the calves last week. Tracks near the eastern hills. Thought you might want to come out with me tomorrow. Not to hunt, just to see." She nodded. "I will." They rode out before first light, the stars still fading behind them. The hills to the east were steeper, dotted with scrub oak and thick sage. Jasper dismounted when they reached a narrow trail winding between two sandstone outcrops. "Tracks are fresher up this way," he said. "You'll want to walk." They climbed in silence, Olive's boots scuffing against loose stone. The sun had just begun to spill into the canyon below when Jasper paused and pointed to a patch of disturbed soil. A split hoof print marked the edge, and beside it, clawed impressions from padded feet. "Wolf passed here early," he said. "Maybe just before dawn." Olive crouched to study the print. Big, older male by the look. They stood quiet a moment, the wind moving light through the brush. Then Olive asked, You ever think about leaving? Jasper's gaze stayed on the track. Used to. Thought if I went far enough, I wouldn't feel the weight of what came before. And now, he looked at her then. Now I think some places don't let go. Not because they trap you, but because they see who you are and they hold on. She straightened. You talk like the land's a person. Sometimes I think it's more honest than most. They followed the ridge back down, the morning thick with heat already rising off the stone. At the bottom, Olive paused beside a wild plum tree, its branches heavy with fruit. These any good? She asked. Jasper chuckled low. Only if you don't mind the skin puckering your mouth. She plucked one and bit in. Her eyes watered. He leaned against his saddle, watching her with a crooked grin. Told you. She laughed, the sound catching in her throat. Why bring me out here, really? He grew quiet. I wanted to know if you'd still stand beside me when there's nothing easy. No flowers. No open sky. Just tracks in the dirt and long walks through heat. She stepped closer. I would. He reached for her hand then, not abrupt, just steady. Their fingers met in the stillness, warm and certain. That night, under a sky thick with stars, Jasper walked her to the bunkhouse steps. She paused, one hand on the railing, the other brushing against his shirt front. I don't want to sleep alone tonight, she said, voice low, eyes steady. You sure? He asked. She nodded. I've been sure since the ridge. He didn't kiss her then, just placed his palm against her cheek, rough thumb resting beneath her eye. I'll wait here, he said. You come when you're ready. She returned minutes later, a blanket over one arm, boots in hand. Together, they walked to the old hay barn, empty for the season. Inside, dust motes caught the lantern light, and the air smelled of dried timothy and warm wood. They made a bed in the loft, away from the open doors. No words passed between them as they lay beside each other. Just the slow, mutual understanding of two people who had already decided. Outside, the horses shifted in their stalls. A whip-poor will called once from the trees. Inside, Jasper curled his arm around Olive's waist, and she let her forehead rest against the curve of his shoulder. Sleep came slow and full, and when the wind stirred the barn walls near dawn, neither of them stirred. The September wind carried the first edge of cool, brushing the tops of the grass with a gentler hand than summer ever had. The cattle were starting to edge closer to the lower pastures again, sensing the shift. Olive had begun wearing her father's old jacket in the mornings, the sleeves rolled once at the cuffs. She found comfort in the worn wool, in knowing the weight of it had steadied another set of shoulders before hers. Jasper met her near the feed shed just after sunrise, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder and a canvas satchel in his hand. Caldwell wants us to check the north boundary, he said. Fence lines old, gates likely sagging. She nodded, pulling her gloves from her coat pocket. You bringing that satchel for tools or provisions? He passed it to her with a flick of his chin. Both. Figured we'd be out past midday. They rode without hurry, crossing the east pasture and skirting a dry creek where the cottonwoods still held green. A pair of quail flared up from the brush, and Olive's horse danced sidelong before settling. You ever break one of those? She asked, watching the birds vanish into the thicket. Once, Jasper said. Had to haul it up from a trap with a busted wing. Took near a month to heal. You let it go after? He nodded. Flew straight up like it never knew me. Still think about that sometimes. They reached the north fence by mid-morning. The posts leaned in places, wire sagging where the staples had pulled loose. Jasper knelt beside one of the corner posts, testing its give. Olive crouched nearby, brushing dirt from a split rail. The ground's pulling away here, she said. Might be better to rerun the wire higher. He stood, brushing off his knees. You want to drive the staples? I do. They worked steady, the hammer's rhythm broken only by the occasional call of a crow or the rustle of wind in the brittle grass. When the last staple was set, Jasper offered her a strip of dried meat from the satchel, and they sat with their backs against the fence, legs stretched long in front of them. You ever think about your mother? He asked, eyes on the horizon. Not often, Olive said. She died when I was 6. I remember her voice, though. Soft, but she didn't whisper. She said things plain. Jasper nodded. My mother never raised her voice either, but you knew when she meant something. She could quiet a room just by standing in the doorway. Olive turned to him. You ever miss Arkansas? Sometimes, he said. Mostly in spring. The trees bloom heavy there. Smell of wet bark and violets. But I don't belong there. Why not? He hesitated, then picked up a stone and turned it in his hand. Too much memory. Not enough future. She looked at him, the lines at the corner of his eyes deeper in the light. You think this place holds one for you? He turned the stone once more, then set it down. I do now. They rode back slow, letting the horses find their pace. Overhead, clouds drifted low and wide, and the smell of distant rain hung in the air. As they neared the barn, Jasper reached across the space between their horses and touched her wrist, light as a question. You ever think about staying in the main house? He asked. There's a second room. Enough space for 2. Olive didn't answer right away. She studied the barn roofline, then the pile of firewood stacked near the wall. You asking me to move in? I am. She looked at him. And what would I be in that house? He met her gaze. Not a guest. She tipped her head. Then ask me proper. Jasper dismounted without a word, looped his reins, and stepped to her stirrup. He offered a hand. She took it and slid down, boots hitting earth with a quiet thump. He didn't let go. I've never had much, he said. But what I do have, I want to share. You, me, whatever comes next. I want to build it with you. Her breath caught, not from surprise but from the weight of the moment settling solid between them. I've never had a home I chose, she said. Maybe it's time I did. They stood there in the fading light, her hands still in his, the horses shifting behind them. No kiss, no grand declarations. Just 2 people who had walked through dust and loss and found something steady in each other. Later that night, Olive packed her few things from the bunkhouse. The lantern burned low as she folded her father's jacket one last time and placed it on the bottom of the wooden crate Jasper had left for her. She walked across the yard with it tucked under one arm, the stars wheeling slow overhead, and when she stepped through the threshold of the main house, Jasper was already inside, setting kindling in the hearth. He didn't speak, just looked up and nodded once. She set the crate down, crossed to him, and knelt beside the fire. Together, they lit the flame. By mid-October, the prairie had turned the color of rusted copper, and the wind carried the dry whisper of winter not far behind. The days came cooler now, the sun lower in the sky, and mornings began with frost on the pump handle and breath puffing white in the air. Inside the main house, warmth lingered in the floorboards and the smell of wood smoke clung to the beams overhead. Jasper had built a cedar cabinet for Olive's sewing things and mounted it against the wall beside the hearth. She'd never asked for it, but he'd noticed her folding her needles into a kerchief each night, and that had been enough. She ran her fingers along the grain when she found it, said nothing, but left her hand resting there for a long while. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the windows turned gold, Olive stood at the stove stirring cornmeal into a pot of bubbling milk. Jasper was beside her, slicing cured ham into thin strips for the skillet, sleeves rolled and forearms marked with the pale dust of fence work. I had a letter, she said quietly, from my cousin. He didn't look up, just nodded once for her to go on. "She's heading back east," said the saloon changed owners. "She's got a position lined up in St. Louis, with a family she knew before." Jasper slid the ham into the pan and set it over the flame. "You think about going?" "I did," she said. "A long time ago." He finally looked at her, eyes steady. "And now, I don't feel pulled in that direction anymore." He didn't answer right away. The fire popped beneath the skillet. "I've thought about whether I'm enough," he said after a while, voice low. "I never had schooling past 13. I don't know fine words or what cities ask of a person." She turned then, her hands still wrapped around the wooden spoon. "You built a life out here with nothing but your hands and your will. You never turned from hard work or from me. Don't talk like you're lacking." He reached for her then, his fingers brushing her wrist, and she let the spoon drop into the pot and leaned into him, their foreheads touching. "I don't want anything finer," she whispered. "I want this. You." Every cold morning, every cracked knuckle, every quiet supper. That night, the wind picked up hard, rattling the eaves and sending leaves skittering across the yard. Jasper laid another log on the fire while Olive braided her hair for bed. When she slipped beneath the quilt, he was already there, one arm beneath his head, the other reaching for her without a word. They slept pressed close, the house holding steady around them. Winter came early that year. Snow crept in before the end of November, light at first, then thick and heavy. The cattle were driven down to the lower corrals, and the herd thinned for sale. Jasper took on the ledgers, slow and careful, though numbers never came easy to him. Olive helped where she could, her penmanship neater, her sums quicker. They found a rhythm. Some days they spoke little. Other days, they laughed until their ribs ached, trading stories while tending tack or boiling preserves. On the first Sunday of December, Jasper shaved smooth and put on the cleanest shirt he owned. Olive wore her mother's brooch, the one she'd kept wrapped in linen since her father's burial. They rode into town and stood before Reverend Tully in the small white chapel near the mercantile. No crowd, no fuss. Just them, and the quiet promise they'd already been living for months. Afterward, they shared a meal with a few neighbors who'd come in from the outlying ranches. Jasper didn't make a speech, but he touched Olive's back when he passed behind her chair and looked at her like she was something he'd never stop thanking the world for. They rode home in silence, the sky deepening to indigo. At the gate, he reached for her hand. "You sure?" he asked. She squeezed his fingers. Every day. That night, the fire burned low and slow, and the snow began to fall again, soft as breath. Years passed, steady and full. They never had much money, but they had enough, and the land gave more than it took most seasons. Jasper built a second stall on the barn when Olive took in a mare left behind by a drifter. She taught a neighbor girl to read by lantern light during long winters, and Jasper learned to mend boots with a finer hand. They carved their names into the porch rail one spring and never spoke of moving again. One warm evening, a boy with dark hair and his mother's eyes sat between them on the porch, legs swinging, holding a jar of fireflies. Jasper rested a hand on his son's back. Olive leaned into his shoulder. The fields were green again, the air thick with the smell of cut hay, and the stars blinked out one by one. Olive looked out across the darkening land and whispered, "This is what home feels like." Jasper kissed her temple, then the edge of her jaw, and said only, "Yes," and it was, always,